My name is James Underhill, and I'm here from the Rouen Ethnolinguistics project in France, and we're here in Australia, at Australian National University, with Anna Wierzbicka. Anna, a lot of people are willing to accept that English and different languages have different concepts that we have to learn, but they tend to think of emotions, about the emotions of people as the humankind, as universal. If emotion is not universal, what is then? Where do you situate yourself in those debates?
Well, I think that to some extent that there is something universal about how people feel. The word emotion itself is an English word, which doesn't correspond even to the German word émotion or to French émotion. So really, when you start with emotion, you are already in the Anglo territory. But I would prefer to start with feel. People have good feelings and bad feelings in all languages, because we have lexical evidence for this. You can feel something good, you can feel something bad, you can feel something very good, or you can feel something very bad. That's universal.
Are you thinking more in terms of the verb or the noun? Feel, feeling?
No, well, it's usually verb.
Okay.
You feel something, yeah. However, in different languages, of course, people think about how they feel in many different ways, and they associate the different ways of feeling with certain thought patterns, with certain patterns of thinking. And these patterns of thinking are different in different languages and different cultures. And then you get complex words, complex concepts based on feel, plus a particular pattern of thinking. And this is language specific. So for example, frustration. A lot has been written about it. In English speakers often say that they feel frustrated, but lots of languages around the world don't have a word like frustration, and the English word frustration and frustrated is actually traveling the world, being borrowed into lots of languages. So frustration now is common apparently in German, because the concept is coming from English, because the pattern of thinking associated with the bad feeling is culture specific. So you don't get it in other languages. And every language has its own complex concepts which refer to one particular kind of feeling, feeling I mean in a verbal sense, associated with a pattern of thinking which is characteristic or important for speakers of that language. So if you want an example from Polish, well, for example, zdenerwowanie, denerwować. That's a very important word for me. I often feel that I'm denerwuję się, nie denerwuj się.
Would you translate as annoyed, irritated?
Well, it doesn't match any of those.
Okay, so where
it just
does it fall
doesn't. But I can give you an explanation in terms of semantic components. So you have a number of English words which would overlap with denerwowanie. But essentially you think something like, I've written about it, so I can't remember the exact explication, but something bad is happening now. I don't want it to be happening, and I feel something bad because of this, and I think I should do something because of this, but I don't know what I can do.
Okay.
So you are in a state of agitation, stress, or something, but there isn't a single word in English which would match this. I think there are good cultural reasons why frustration is so important for speakers of English, and zdenerwowanie is important for in Polish culture, but I won't go into that. But in any case, they don't match.
Would you say zdenerwowanie matches more, I'm thinking in terms of Czech, but in terms, would it match more with énervé in French, do you think? I have a German friend who often says, I'm innervated, as though this is an English word, but I think most English people find this a very literary and strange word that might be rendered by
They don't
annoyed.
match. No, I don't think they match, but if you do an explication of each of those words, you will see that they share various components, but there are some components which are different, and you can show precisely what the difference is. And I think this difference in the thinking pattern is probably associated with a different way of feeling, because the feeling is defined in relation to that complex of thoughts that you have. Okay. So to that extent, emotions can be culture specific.
Okay, that's interesting. In Imprisoned in English, one of your most recent books, published in 2014, you compare angst in German with fear in English. What conclusions do you draw from that study?
Well, first of all, I want to establish that these words have different meanings. But I also do try to link it with other cultural differences which other people written about this. I mean, you have angst is a borrowing from German in English, which is a good indication that people, speakers of English who are familiar with German, feel that there is no such word in English, so they borrow the German word, except that, of course, there is a difference in meaning. They don't borrow it with exactly the same meaning.
They limit the meaning very much.
Yeah.
For me, angst, I experience as a very almost Kafkaesque, modern form of existential. We'll speak in terms of existential angst. That's the kind of collocation you get.
Yeah.
Whereas the Germans are not thinking in terms of existential angst.
Yeah.
It's not something. It's not very abstract. It's not very literary. It's a general
Absolutely,
term.
Yeah, and the point is that when psychologists start to write about basic human emotions, German psychologists are convinced that angst is the basic human emotion. Whereas speakers, English-speaking psychologists are convinced that it's fear, which is the basic human emotion, but the words don't mean the same. So they look at basic human emotions from the point of view of their native language.
Okay, so they are imprisoned in their language. And here, if we're clear then, you're not criticizing English speakers and you're not criticizing German speakers, you're thinking within their linguistic resources. You're thinking about this attempt, this Western rationalist or this basic trend to try to understand other cultures within our own organization, within our own concepts. Is that what you're criticizing?
Well, no, I don't talk about Western cultures here. I'm speaking specifically about English.
Okay.
English is now a global language, and it carries its conceptual world with it around the world. This is a fact of life, but this is not recognized by many scholars who think that they are somehow talking about the world and humans from some kind of neutral perspective, but they are not.
Do you not see a problem with the way that other cultures have adopted English ways of thinking about these questions? English has exported its concepts, but they've exported them into different cultures that have adopted those ways of seeing things. Is there not a problem there of other cultures thinking within the linguistic limits of English when they start working on these questions?
Yes, I think so, very much so. And our friend Carsten Levison has now founded a new journal, the Journal of Colonial Linguistics, where he talks about how English ways of thinking embedded in English words spread around the world with the assumption that this is somehow human, simply human.
Would you think in terms of security within those terms? Security is a word that's been exported into many languages over the last 20 years. Is this the kind of concept that's transforming the way other peoples think?
I don't know, but I mean, my friend, a colleague Anna Wierzbicka, and I have just finished a paper on the English word sex and the Russian borrowing sex, and how the word sex is used in Russian, and we are showing, how different the Russian sex is from English sex, and what implications this has, for what sort of cultural implications it has. So these English words travel the world, and they often change in meaning, but they carry with them certain assumptions. Well, fair, of course, is a very good example, because the English word fair has been borrowed into lots of languages, and the idea that fairness is somehow a human universal is very widespread. You will find many philosophers and sociologists now writing in English saying that this is a basic sort of human value. It's fairness, which is just, some people write about chimpanzees, that they have that experiments show that chimpanzees have a sense of fairness. Okay,
you're skeptical.
Well, I mean, fairness is an Anglo concept. Poles don't think in terms of fairness, so why should chimpanzees think in terms of fairness? But that's if you look at chimpanzees or poles through the English glasses, you will find fairness there.
Okay, let's take it more back to, we've spoken a little about in the other interviews about feelings and emotions and the body. For you, disgust is not a universal, although we might think in terms of French, English, or...
Yeah, there are big differences between the French dégoût and the English disgust, and Cliff Goddard has a paper about it where she shows how dégoût and disgust differ.
Doesn't coincide. Yeah.
No, they don't coincide.
Okay, so for you, they're not universal. And I think one of
and
the...
Ekel, I mean, he also, the German Ekel, and this is linked with different theories by Freud, for example, for whom Ekel was so terribly important. But Ekel is different from dégoût and different from disgust and so on. So psychologists absolutize the concept derived from their native language.
I think that you give a specific example from German about it was earthworms, which is Erdwärme, or is it in German, that are not ekel. They're not discussing that there's a sort of different organization of that way of thinking.
Yes. Well, some of them have a reference point in you don't want to touch this thing, or you don't want to be near this thing, or you don't want to have this thing in the mouth.
Right,
so
exactly.
you have different reference points in distance, in touching, and in the mouth, in the nose, and so on. So conceptualization is different.
Okay then, you're not thinking that we've already spoken a little bit about oppositions, but in the other interviews, but you're not thinking in terms of oppositions in terms of love, hate, being attracted, being disgusted, not even in want and don't want. I think you understand. You see these want and don't want as both universals. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay,
yeah.
both are universals, but love and hate would not be universals. They would be.
But these are English words, which
These are
don't
English
match words in other languages.
In terms of be attracted to it as disgusted, you would see these as different in different language systems? To be attracted to and to be disgusted by? Or?
To be attracted, that's an English expression,
Okay.
which doesn't match anything in other. But on the subject of love, I wanted to say, I don't want to claim that love is just an English concept, and I would prefer to talk about the verb, to love someone. I think this is a word which does have equivalents in most, if not all, European languages. But that's for cultural reasons, because the word, really the concept, according to something that I've just written recently and published recently, it's really a concept which has its roots in the New Testament. So it's spread with the Christian culture, and now I think that the French aimer and the German Lieben and the English love and mean exactly the same. But that's a sort of aerial concept, so to speak. You know, it's a Christian concept which spread into all those languages. But you will not find a word like love, for example, in the languages of Oceania. And there's a lot of literature on this, like in many languages, like if I look in the Micronesia, the word closest to love would mean something like to feel sorry. Compassion, love, sadness are covered by one word. In other words, you think, oh, something bad is happening to this person, and I feel something good towards this person because of this. But the love in European languages doesn't have that component of thinking that something bad is happening to that person. So it's a different concept.
Okay, we're particularly interested in the concept of translating worldviews, and I'm interested in examples where different languages will use English words. I'm thinking of the French was I want je veux le big love. In fact, it's a French calque of le grand amour, which doesn't really translate. There is no the big love. Aren't they projecting something? Do you think they're perceiving something in the English concept that is specific, language specific? The other example I have from the 1990s was the words that we were exporting into Russian. There was a word sexapilny. It was to have sex appeal, which is very strange to transform a noun. It's a double noun. It says sex and appeal, so it's a noun phrase. It's fairly complex grammatically speaking. Transforming a noun phrase into an adjective is quite strange. But there seems to be a sort of Russian projection of the American Hollywood world of sex appeal being an Anglo concept, not necessarily a Russian value or a Russian concept. Does that reveal anything about the way that Russians are thinking in terms of sex, or the way those? Yes,
well, as I mentioned, we've just done this study of how the word sex is used in Russian. And there are very interesting differences, because for the most common expression involving sex in Russian is заниматься сексом, to be occupied in sex. And there's a whole attitude implied in this, that people want to do something which we can describe in terms of bodily prototypes for some time, and they don't want to think about anything else as they do it, which is different, because I think, well, maybe the topic is too complex to cover in just a few minutes, but there are certainly cultural and conceptual implications linked with loan words.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you, James.